over, and what's going to end up being our new system in the future. And the way it's going to work is pretty much as we saw in Argentina. Once the official, which is our most recent example, but you could go back to France and the exchange of the new franc for the old franc and the kind of troubles that went through the country at that point as well. Any of these various different currency shifts provide you with a basic model as to what we're going to face. So in Argentina, the most recent one there, we had a situation where we had food surpluses and no delivery system in some places. And in other places, of course, you had food deprivation because of the same cause, no delivery system. And various different kinds of things are occurring all over. If you want a real good model for it, the thing to do is to read Dmitry Orlov's book, Reinventing Collapse, because he juxtaposes the collapse of the American empire with the collapse that we actually have a model for in the collapse of the Soviet empire, and shows where we're more vulnerable and where they actually had it better.
Very nicely explained.
And their issue was that, of course, no one lost their houses. Mm-hmm. Because all housing was government-owned, that provided everyone with a secure base from which to live. There was no concept of foreclosure. That's going to really impact the population here, and we're seeing it even now where people are trying to squat in the foreclosed houses. And that's actually, I think, in our data showing up in this summer as almost a political movement, almost a third party of people. So many people.
That was fascinating reading about that, and so logical.
It is now. When we first started seeing it a couple of years ago, it just really didn't seem to mesh with the reality. That's why some of the stuff we're seeing now, 3 and 4 years out, for a much reformed or evolved system inside the old decaying one, as being probably the best model to really look at it. For instance, our agricultural system is so dependent on oil that if oil is removed, our calorie production capability drops by 90%. However, it turns out that our calorie production capability using oil is not very efficient. The most efficient method for growing food on the planet, the best one ever seen, calories in for calories out, was the old Russian village system, pre-collective farm. It was the net exporter of wheat for generations and other grains, and etc., and yet had relatively minor levels of inputs. So we're probably going to end up going back to something like that, some kind of a modern reinvention of that, just as a method of surviving, because we won't have the huge amounts of oil to power our agricultural system.
We definitely, yes, are going back to what became a cliche, back to basics.
Yeah.
And it was a cliche because it's, okay, we won't turn on the TV and the RV when we go camping.
Yeah.
When we were roughing it for a weekend, right?
Yeah, there's that whole aspect of things there, because of course they'll still continue with the 5 people that own all the media, are still going to continue as long as they possibly can to pump out all of the propaganda and keep everybody attuned to the TV sets as opposed to going on out and altering their circumstances. But at some point they're going to run into real reality. In fact, we're seeing it all over now. Look at the issue of the switch over to the digital TV being delayed, perhaps. Why? Well, economically, 1.9 million people or something, the poorest of the poor, can't afford the conversion. And then there's another 38 million that wouldn't participate or something. So the powers that be are having to rethink their whole approach and plan to this. And we're going to see more and more examples of that as we continue to go forward this year.
I thought that was interesting. With everything Obama has to deal with, he actually came out and spoke about that, about asking that the administration delays this date.
Yeah. Well, they don't want their propaganda system to break down on the people that are most likely to take umbrage at their acts. Bear in mind that if you're in middle class, you can tolerate soft dictatorship a lot better than someone who's in the lower class who's receiving the harder edge of that particular stick. And they know this, and they don't want to engender yet more social action kind of thing. Because very few people recognize this, but the 1930s, the country almost broke apart. There were repeated movements throughout the country, whether it was the Wobblies or the other labor movements and so on that could have at that point tipped us over into communism, at least was the fear of the government. And in fact, American soldiers were used to suppress labor movements and in many cases try and control tens of thousands of individuals. And it didn't go well. And the powers that be know it didn't go well. And now they're outnumbered in a much more severe way than they were back then. The idea of the battle-hardened group from Iraq coming back, the battalion. It's like, okay, so what? 1 battalion or 50 battalions? It's actually kind of immaterial. You cannot garrison a country the size of the U.S. without at least having at least 20% of the population be part of the garrisoning activity. If you fail at that level, then your garrison, your attempt to control has failed, which they're recognizing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the attitude of the troops.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, in so many aspects, it's a hugely interesting puzzle to me. You see it much more clearly, but all of these pieces are, and that's why it's so great to have your information and George's information and others, is because it helps put the pieces in the right place, the pieces of the puzzle in the right place.
Well, we try our best. Certainly work a number of hours at trying to fit everything together.
You certainly do, thanks to you and Igor.
Yeah.
So
and the pies.
I take it then that the analog TVs go out, and then all those people have time to think.
That's kind of the scary part for the powers that be. Also, there's another component to that, which is that the claims of electronic manipulation of the consciousness are quite true. And the TV, of course, is certainly a huge propaganda device, but it's also filled with subliminals. And then high definition is actually strobing at levels that reach much further into the control of the brain. And so they're much more effective. The issue for us all is that having been raised on the TV generation forward, that the more TV you're exposed to, even their own scientists admit it, the less you pay attention to the bull that's being thrown out of it. And so they've got a real problem. Well, one of the solutions they had a number of years back was to increase the intensity of the strobe effect within the television to do a better level of entrainment such that anything that was put out would be more believable. Sort of makes sense?
Oh, yeah. That answers, I've been wondering what is the difference with it, and it didn't occur to me that, and that makes total sense.
And it's sort of like you got a monkey that's, in captivity, and he gets rather jaded with his little bit of costume jewelry, so you get him a bigger, sparklier piece. And then and then he's, back to his old ways for a while. And that was sort of the thought way back when. And you get into some levels of conspiracies that are quite strange, but some of it actually makes sense because you can see, as Buckminster Fuller said, the invisible hand. For instance, the rise of fluoride in our national watering system, and now it turns out that fluoride really impacts the pineal gland. The pineal gland is one of the parts of the brain that's responsible for, if you will, spirituality and all of the more human parts of being human. Without the pineal gland and its input, or modulated input, you end up with things that people really thinking, new neural pathways. You also have a tendency to have the population be a little bit more erratic, especially from a control mechanism. And now, of course, we learned that all of the antidepressant kind of drugs are also pineal gland impacting. And then it goes on to even further connections, stranger connections, such as the rise of the fluoride movement, and at the same time, almost in juxtaposition with each other, the huge movement to ban hemp of all kinds. Why? Well, because not only were we making rope out of it, but we were smoking it at the time, and it turns out that THC is a compound which is neurogenic. It actually grows new neural pathways and has all kinds of other benefits to people for nausea, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really cool thing, and we could continue to use those, but what really scares the powers that be is this neurogenic component. And it keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper, and takes you all the way back to the Egyptian mystery schools and to why they're really concerned about the pineal gland and its effective use as a tool or technology by the populace at large. And we get hints of it in the concept of the mass meditations. And if you got enough people meditating, then certain changes would occur within the social order and so on, all of which is likely very true, and also very much more true than any of us would give credence for. But based on the fear levels around such subjects in the powers that be entity, it's like, they're really very afraid of this.
Yeah, the little robots are becoming sentient.
Yeah.
Watch out, they're waking up. What are we going to do?
Well, it's a horrid time, too, because we can imagine a scenario that goes all the way to the extreme that was seen in the wars between the U.S. and Britain and in the crash of the 1890s. In the crash of the 1890s, there was huge social disruption. There were giant riots, similar in nature to the riots against the introduction of a black labor force in the military and in New York in the Civil War period of time, in which thousands of individuals were killed. Now, within the particular milieu that we're in now, we're much closer to what happened with enclaves of the British or Loyalists in the various War of 1812 or the Revolutionary War, in which people were trapped in their carriages, for instance, and just burned alive by the mobs that were out prowling for victims at night. And we may indeed see that, and the powers that be certainly fear that at this point. It's not good. It doesn't solve the problem, but...
Yeah, gosh, we've got many more questions.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, we are living a science fiction movie that is, greater than any science fiction ever made.
There's no grade B, that's for sure, yeah.
And but it's not science fiction, but you know what I mean.
Oh, I certainly do, yeah.
Living.
Yeah. Manifesting reality is just quite odd. And like I say, that's why it's best to keep a little journal about how it's manifesting around you, because even if you never go back and read it again, it brings those elements up to consciousness, and you can say, oh yeah, I'm starting to see how universe is talking to me about this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of brain food we need.
It is indeed. The more we are harmonious with how universe wants to express stuff, the more we can get away from all of these nasty emotional reactions that have us acting out against each other.
There's the bottom line of it all for us as humans, isn't it?
That is indeed the case, yeah.
Yes.
So
we got to all get along and got to get rid of the powers that be, and then set out organizing ourselves in a much more deliberate manner as a species. The good news is that we are right at that cusp, and as I said, the good and bad news is that we're the first generation that has to really go through this. Well,
if we do it right, we'll be the last that has to make all the big cleanup here.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. We don't want to have to sweep up this mess twice, yeah.
Yeah, and then we can have fun on this planet. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the whole idea, the shibumi of it all, the sublime beauty that's within the planet and everything that's functioning, and then all the crud that we're pouring out.
Yeah.
We just got to get our heads straight around
Shibumi was a great book.
All right, you guys, we're out of time.
Okay. We're out. Until next time.
Thank you, Clif.
Okay, and give me a call and we'll do it again.
All right.
Sure
Thanks
will.
for listening.